Hello and welcome to the Oddschecker betting show. This is your Premier League 23-24 preview with a bit of a twist. We'll get into that in a second. I'm your host, George Elek, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Ali Maxwell.
That's
Ali,
nice.
We work together a lot, not the top 20, previewing EFL content. Now we've been stepped up to the big time.
Absolutely, yeah, making a Premier League 1-20 debut. We're both addicted at this time of year to making predictions of league tables from bottom to top. We've spent a lot of time chatting about this. We think we've come up with something that will resemble the final Premier League table.
Hopefully.
And yeah, excited to kind of prove our worth, I guess, at Premier League level.
Let's see. Yeah, stick to the EFL. I can already read that in the comments. But yeah, as Ali said, this is a preview where we're going to be going from 20th to 1st in our predictions of how the table will look. And the reason for that is really exciting. We've got the Million Pound Predictor we've launched here at Oddschecker in time for the new Premier League season. Simply predict the final table in the Premier League in the 23-24 season for the chance to win £1 million.
It seems a lot.
I can't believe I get to say that. £1 million if you predict the table correctly. There is strictly one entry per user. Entries close on the 15th of September at 4 o'clock, 18 plus only, UK only as well. Full T's and C's to apply that you can find on the website. So make sure you do go and check that out. And hopefully we can give you some insight to help you choose how you're going to use your entry and how you're going to order these teams. Without much more to talk about, it's time to go through the teams. And down in 20th, Luton are unsurprisingly the favourites for the drop, but we don't have them 20th. They're 4-11, 4-6. Second favourites are Sheffield United, promoted last season automatically, but some negativity around the club at the moment. Ali, why do you think we have them? Well, why do we have them in 20th?
I think a lot of negativity looking from the outside in, and I think that could help to galvanise Paul Heckingbottom and the way that he motivates his squad to start the season. Because it's fair to say a lot of people are looking at the Sheffield United team, in particular having lost Iliman Ndiaye and Sander Berge. I would say they're two best attacking players. Ndiaye from a kind of number 9/10 role where he was their key goal scorer and key creator, and Berge providing the thrust from midfield, a really, really quality ball carrier in the final third, a goal threat, and also someone that could carry the ball forward in transition and provide them a threat on that front. Both of those players are gone from their team, and I think it's fair to say that the quality of player left behind is much lower than those two as individuals, particularly in the final third. So instantly you're concerned about a team that is A, moving up a level, and B, losing what we consider to be basically their two key players in the top end of the pitch. So high concerns there for me. And then just generally, like you want the club going up to be going up with incredible energy and atmosphere brought on by promotion. I don't feel that necessarily with Blades, and it's not just because of the departure of those two key players, although that has had a big impact. It's also because of the ownership situation, where the owner of the club has been very openly trying to sell it for quite some time now. The understanding is that he basically isn't willing or able to fund the club long term at the level that it needs funding. And so he has very openly been looking for investment to sell the club. There are lots of rumours that is imminent, but that's been the case for some time. There's been a few sort of false dawns already. For me, this doesn't help paint a picture of the club heading into the Premier League, a together club, a club with everyone pulling in the right direction. I think it's more off-field uncertainty that I think, unfortunately, threatens to undermine what Paul Heckingbottom has done, which is, up to this point, a sensational job at Sheffield United. I mean, so personnel issues for me, ownership uncertainty as well, even tactically, I'm finding it really difficult with the players that they have at their disposal to work out. Are they going to sit deep and be a counter-attacking team? Well, they don't really have the players at the top end of the pitch to be a big threat on that front for me. Are they going to try and press high and be a team that plays on the front foot? Well, I think that could come with some real issues because they simply will not have the talent advantage in basically any game this season. So, big concerns. Am I excited for Anis Slimani, who they've signed from Bromby? Yes, I am. I think he's going to be very energetic in the centre of the park. But, of course, I'm proven at this level, the toughest level of them all.
Yeah, that's why we have Blades, Sheffield United down in 20th. In 19th, we are recording this as there's some kind of speculation going on around this club. It's Wolves, who we currently have in 19th. We're recording this at about 3:15 on Tuesday, the 8th of August. News has broken this morning that Julian Lopetegui is supposedly in crunch talks with the Wolves hierarchy around possibly leaving the club. Gary O'Neill is rumoured to be the person that's taking over. And this might age terribly, because maybe when this goes out, Lopetegui signed a new contract and Gary O'Neill is nowhere near Wolves. But we have to factor that in here. And even if we didn't, I still think it's pretty hard to be positive about Wolves' chances going forward. If you look at last season, they were third bottom for non-penalty expected goals ratio. And if you take from January onwards, where they were perceived to have improved under Lopetegui, they're down second bottom as well. So you can see that even though they managed to stay up and did so fairly comfortably in the end, having been embroiled in that relegation battle, actually, when you look at the underlying data, they were projecting as a poor relegation-style team. Then you look at the transfer business itself, and in terms of players leaving, in Ruben Neves, there are a lot of players we're going to be talking about who've left clubs in this area between kind of 20th and 15th, 14th. But I think in Ruben Neves, you can forget that this is a guy who, in the last couple of seasons, has been linked to Manchester United, he's been linked to Barcelona. He's ended up going to Saudi Arabia. In my mind, it's almost one of the most depressing moves to Saudi Arabia, where it's a guy that would not walk into any midfield in the world, but he would be an asset to any club in European football. And he's decided to take that move. And his loss in midfield, I think, for Wolves will be massive. Also, you've got to think there's João Moutinho, who used to be so important. We've seen him become less and less important, but he's another year older again. And when you look at the transfers that have come in, it's really hard to get particularly excited about any of them. Cunha came in on loan last season, didn't provide the goals that we knew that they needed, and there's very little else coming in. And that it's clear to see that the reasons why Lopetegui is unhappy at the club is because he feels like promises that were made to him, assurances that were made to him when he first came through the door, haven't been kept up. And in Gary O'Neill, a manager who did an incredible job to keep Bournemouth up last season. Big red flags in the underlying numbers there, all campaign. Even though he did incredibly to get them over the line, actually, again, their XG data wasn't particularly good, and it's a huge job for him. You've got a guy who was hired as a Spain manager a few years ago, being replaced by Gary O'Neill, who kind of fell into a Premier League job. So I find it very hard to see why there won't be a big drop-off from Wolves this season. And if that does happen, then that's going to mean they're in the relegation places. So Wolves we have down in 19th. Luton fans getting very excited at the moment, Ali. Who do we have in 18th?
Not Luton.
No.
Yeah, we've got Everton in 18th. And I think the first thing to say isn't specific to Everton Football Club, but we've been doing predictions like this for some time. One of the things that's really important is, while there are lots of preconceived notions that we all have, bias or perceived truths about football, they can be really damaging when it comes to predictions, because they can make you think a certain kind of way. Everton have never been relegated, from the Premier League. So there may be some people watching, plenty of people out there, who think that they are, for whatever reason, too established a Premier League club, too big a club to be relegated. But clearly that's not true. We've seen it in the last few years. Leicester and Leeds went down from the Premier League last year. In the last 5 to 10 years, Aston Villa have been relegated, having never gone down before. Sunderland as well, Newcastle twice. There is no divine right to be in the Premier League, even if you've been in it since its inception. So that's the first thing to say. Everton, for me, have been circling the drain of relegation for a few years. And generally, I think the trend of clubs that do that, Aston Villa are a good example from 6-7 years ago, generally they do go down unless something fairly major happens. And I'm looking at the summer and I'm desperately asking, what are they doing here to really change the pathway of the football?
Do you think they kind of feel like there's some complacency, like we brought in Dyche, that should be enough, we're not really doing much else?
That's exactly the sense that I get, that it's all on Sean Dyche. And a man who I have great respect for, he did an incredible job for a long period of time at Burnley, but a club in Everton that I believe has an entirely different personality and entirely different context to Burnley Football Club, that doesn't necessarily have the squad that Dyche built like he did at Burnley, took them up and was able to carry them on. And a club that I think can very quickly descend into panic and urgency, which is something that's always going to undermine, the work of a manager early on in the season. So I'm really, really concerned about what I'm seeing. They were terrible going forward last season. The set-piece threat, as you'd imagine, improved somewhat under Dyche. The overall numbers and even the points return didn't improve that much under Dyche. I didn't suddenly see them being a particularly impressive Premier League team. You're relying still on Calvert-Lewin to stay fit and score your goals. He may do that, he may not do that. He certainly didn't last season. Neil Maupay maybe doesn't scream Sean Dyche goal-scoring striker to me. I like the midfield that they have, Doucouré and Onana. I think they can make Everton very competitive in certain games, but Overall, I'm really concerned about the club's situation. I think their overspending for a long period of time has hamstrung what they are able to do in the transfer market. We've seen that where on the eve of the season, one signing, 38-year-old Ashley Young on a free transfer, player I've got a lot of respect for, but not someone I see changing the immediate trajectory of this football club. So circling the drain for a while, and I think this could be the year where finally they drop out and get a bit of a slap in the face.
Get a slap in the face.
Yeah, that would be a pretty big slap in the face, getting relegated for the first time in your history.
It definitely would be. I mean, I'm going to go through some odds now that we've gone through our relegated three. Sheffield United, as I say, are 4-6 for relegation. That's best price with Paddy's, Betfair Sportsbook, BetVictor, and a couple of others as well. Everton pretty much 3-1 across the board. Wolverhampton, it says here, Wolves. I think we can call them a bit of a Ted Lasso moment there.
I think if you're relegating them, it's right to be formal.
Yeah, Wolverhampton. The Wolverhampton Wanderers Wolves is what Ted Lasso calls them. 3-1 they are. That is with Unibet and Bet UK, QuinnBet Midnight, and a couple more too. If you agree with us, just one side will go down from those promoted teams last season. 11-8 is the price for that. 2 is 10-11 and his favourite. You can find all these markets on the oddschecker website and on the app as well. Sheffield United are 7-2 best price to finish bottom. That's with BetVictor and Betfred. Interestingly, Wolves 14-1, Everton 16-1. So if you like a bigger price fancy, that could be the way to go. There's also a Premier League treble market as well, but I just do not have the time whilst we're recording this live to find those three teams. But I'm sure it'll be a big price. So make sure you do check that out. Now it is time, I'm afraid, Luton fans, time to take the champagne off ice. And
I thought we had Luton top 6.
No, we didn't. I moved your table around. Luton we've got in 17th, and yeah, I guess. I mean, I'll say a bit, and then I'll throw over to you because we both feel quite strongly about this. And accusations of EFL bias will be thrown at us, and understandably so. But I think with Luton, you've got a team, firstly, who have shown that they were a very, very good championship team, not just last season, but over 2 consecutive campaigns, over 2 consecutive managers. And that is important to me because over the last few years, having there been a lot of bouncing between leagues, when you look at the last 2 or 3 seasons, quite often teams who come up from the Championship into the Premier League and have some degree of continuity end up doing okay. And Luton were completely justified in finishing 3rd last season. There was no fluke about this. They were playoff semi-finalists the year before. And they beat 2 very fancied sides in Middlesbrough and in Sunderland and Coventry in the playoffs. And under Rob Edwards, they've got a manager who has already won a league in League 2. He got the big step up to Watford that didn't work out, was sat when they were 4th, ended up finishing mid-table. And coming in at Luton, he's managed to continue the great work that Nathan Jones did and take them to the Premier League. Like there seems to be this perception that because Luton are a small team and because they have a small budget, they're therefore going to be the worst team. And I just don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. When you compare their recruitment as well with Sheffield United, Sheffield United bring in kind of untested younger players that don't really bulk out the squad. Luton already had a fairly stacked squad and have brought in some quality from EFL level, which again, we know good championship talent generally translates into good Premier League talent, at least at that level anyway. So I think there's a massive amount of complacency going on with Luton. I don't really understand why they would be perceived to be so much worse than other people talking about Derby points tallies. One of those people is in this room behind the camera, which is in itself not great. Prediction in my eyes. So I'm by no means sitting here saying they won't go down. I'm by no means sitting here saying I fancy them to go and do a Sheffield United and finish kind of mid-table in their first season. But don't sleep on Luton because they're going to make life very difficult because there is also room for a team to play in their very direct and physical way.
That's it. It's not any EFL bias. We just put Sheffield United at the bottom, automatically promoted from the Championship.
Yes.
If anything, I think those being very strongly negative on Luton are probably just being quite lazy and looking at names on a sheet of paper, not recognising those names necessarily because they don't follow any league other than the Premier League, deciding therefore that they're not good enough as individuals or as a team unit. And that's not how football works. And the best squads on paper don't always win the league, and the worst squads on paper don't always finish in the bottom 3. Sheffield United came up under Chris Wilder and finished in the top half with a group of players like Fleck and Chris Basham. The same team were relegated the next season. So were those players really good? They finished in the top half of the Premier League. Were they really bad? They finished in the relegation places. Leeds United came up under Marcelo Bielsa with Luke Ayling and Stuart Dallas and Patrick Bamford, and they finished in the top half. And then a few seasons later, a team with Luke Ayling and Stuart Dallas and Patrick Bamford have been relegated from the Premier League. So any reason to think like that, I think, is basically laziness, because you don't want to commit any more time to thinking more deeply about what makes a successful team. Teams that come up from the Championship, in general, that have quite an unusual or a sort of somewhat extreme style of play and do it very, very well, which is what Luton do, tend to do fairly well in the Premier League. So I think that alone, plus everything that you've talked about, makes us pretty positive for Luton. They absolutely know themselves. None of the uncertainty behind the scenes that Sheffield United have had, none of the departures of key players that Sheffield United have had, just clear-minded recruitment, a club that is absolutely understanding of its place in the pyramid, excited to be in the Premier League, and I think can attack it in pretty good shape, unlike the teams that we have below them.
I also like that Luton, because of the way that they play, if you think that the pool of players that play in the systems that generally top-tier teams like to play now is fairly small. So you often see teams basically all going after the same player. The majority of players that Luton sign are not of any interest to any other Premier League teams because they don't suit the style of play, which means that they get to get their business done early and get the players they want in. Come on, Hatters. Right, in 16th now, from the Hatters to a European champion in the Hammers.
Congratulations to West Ham, Europa Conference League winners 2023, and fully deserved of it. What a fantastic team they were on the continent last year. Not a great team in the Premier League. Very much needed a pretty vast improvement in the last few months of the season. I think the reports of their demise early last season were a little exaggerated because they were getting used to fighting on both fronts. And while they improved a little bit, I'm sitting here very, very concerned for one in particular, or rather two big reasons. Firstly is that all reports coming out of the club, or from those who know the club, are that David Moyes, the manager, and the new sporting director are really not in alignment or agreement on how the club should move forward with the vast sum of money that they received from Declan Rice's departure to Arsenal. They've also brought in some money from Gianluca Scamacca. They're the only team in the Premier League that haven't signed anyone with just a couple of days before the season starts. I think try and put aside the fact that they won the Conference League last year, because I don't think that has a huge amount of relevance on how they might do in the Premier League this year, particularly when they've lost a player in Declan Rice, who now plays for one of the best teams in the world, is an England international, and who we should, at this point, if we didn't already, consider to be one of the best players in his position on the planet. So what happens when a team that still struggled in the Premier League last year had one of the best midfielders on the planet in their team as their main leader? What happens when that player leaves? The way that I see football is that is a massive hole to fill in a key area of the pitch, and both in terms of physicality, technical skill, and leadership ability, I don't see how they can, even if they try their best in recruitment, make that up in the aggregate with Declan Rice. So a huge hole in their team. Also concerns about the top end of the pitch. They've struggled for a striker for the last couple of years. Jared Bowen does offer goals from wide areas. Lucas Paquetá's a nice player. We don't have them going down, but I think there's absolutely cause for some concern compared to last season, which ended on such a high for West Ham. We don't think the same will go on this year.
Yeah, so West Ham are the biggest price odds-on team to finish in the, if that makes sense, in the bottom half this season, 3 to 4. So any kind of odds-on backers, or if you want something for your ACCA, that could be a way to play this. 3 to 4, that's a live score bet. They're kind of 4 to 6, with 365 and a couple of others, and also Luton, I should say, 9 to 4 to stay up. So if we are right, it's not a massive price, 9 to 4. It's not like we're tipping up a 50 to 1 shot yet. Next up in 15th, we've got Crystal Palace, and I find it really difficult to work out what I think of Palace this season, because they were desperate for a lot of the campaign last season under Patrick Vieira. Again, the underlying numbers weren't necessarily as bad as the results were. But then you've got Roy Hodgson coming in, a man who was sacked just 18 months before for being too negative, for not being the kind of profile of manager they wanted. And Roy, in his mid-70s, came in and breathed life into Crystal Palace Football Club, and they played them as vibes football. We'd seen Palace play with these incredible players. And I just have to forget that.
Yeah.
I just have to put it out of my mind, because a leopard surely cannot change its spots, let alone when he's 75. And I just feel like as the season goes on, and after this summer where it took a long time for Hodgson to actually be appointed, I just wonder if we're going to see that similar expansive style of football again. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't work, then we already know that there's a precedent for Hodgson being shown the door if they're not particularly happy. Of course, we've spoken about Ruben Neves, you've spoken about Declan Rice. It's now time to talk about Wilfried Zaha, another player who has been just totally transformative as a footballer for Crystal Palace. I think without him, they would never have had the kind of seasons they've had in recent times, which haven't even been that particularly impressive, but they managed to keep themselves away from the Championship. He's moved on. It also feels really likely to me that Michael Olise will leave between now and the end of the month. There's no inside knowledge there. It just seems like when you're being linked to both Manchester City and Chelsea, two teams who in recent times are pretty good at getting deals over the line, and with the price tag being touted kind of 35 million, obviously City having lost Mahrez, Chelsea looking to basically buy all the best young talent in world football. If Olise does move on as well, suddenly you're looking at a squad that felt really fun 12 months ago and just looks a little bit short of quality. Aberi Eze is one of our favourite players. I think when he's fit, he will still be an absolute star for Palace. But when you look beyond Eze, I struggle to really see where the goals come from. Mateta hasn't really done it. Also, Edouard hasn't managed to replicate his form in the Scottish Premiership for Palace either. And
you mean Edouard's found it harder to score goals for Palace in the Prem than he did for Celtic in the Scottish Premiership?
I think if you are a footballer, a striker, then you should take a move to Celtic or Rangers, score a lot of goals, and then take your move and then just get as long a contract as you can possibly get, I think is the way to go about things. I just find it hard, and this is where we're kind of getting into the bottom end of the table. You're generally talking about teams that fans are fairly negative about, but we're now kind of getting into the area of the table where most of the clubs we talk about, their fans are probably hopeful of, we can get into the top half this season. I just, at this stage, and I know that there'll obviously be massive optimism after what Roy did at the back of last season, but I struggle to get overly excited. I'm very excited to see Mateus Franca, who comes in from Flamenco, a 19-year-old attacking midfielder striker who could be absolutely anything. Yeah. But again, you can't pin your hopes on that for this season coming up. So we've got Palace there in 15th. 14th now, Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, I think we're a bit higher on Forest than their general placement, sort of in terms of where the bookies would rate them. For me, Forest were a lot of things last season from the moment they won promotion to the Premier League, and I think that there's an extent to which them staying up was fortunate. I mean, certainly for the people running the club, who I do not think took the right approach to promotion. I think they have a lot to thank their manager Steve Cooper for being that solid hand at the wheel, basically, and getting them through what was a pretty difficult start, quite a few difficult periods in that season. What I would credit those that run the club for is keeping Cooper on and not feeling like they might try and get in a slightly sexier name. I rate him really, really highly. I realise he's only managed one season in the Premier League, but I think he himself performed very impressively, taking what was a pretty bizarrely bloated squad with a ton of new players, not recruited necessarily with a lot of balance in mind, and by the end of the season, eventually, I think he'd built a team that made sense on paper, that certainly made sense on the pitch, that understood their roles, played with a clear mentality and a clear structure, and started to pick up points and stayed up as a result. So for me, it's kind of trusting in Cooper to have, bear in mind they haven't had a summer like they had last year where they've added tons and tons of players. It's just Anthony Elanga from Manchester United, who I think should bolster their attacking options. They've got a lot of threats on that front. Morgan Gibbs-White, I think, should kick on again, and I'm no doubt that by the end of this season he will be in an England squad at some point, because I think he's that good. If Johnson stays, that's a boost. If Awani comes good again, or sort of is better for last season's first season at this level, personally I think there's a lot to like, and I really trust in Cooper to have them kick off this season in much better shape than they started last season because of what they were like at the end of the last campaign. So Forest comfortably staying up for me.
Forest comfortably staying up, and we've also got, and price-wise for there, you've got Forest are 1 to 3, so the bookies do agree with you at this stage in terms of that, but they are one of the favourites for relegation. Fulham we've got in 13th, who had a brilliant campaign last season under Marco Silva, who continues to do a great job there. Again, I kind of feel like this one could change quite quickly in the next couple of weeks when things become clearer. We know that Marco Silva has turned down a move to Saudi Arabia. That Willian signed a new contract when he also had the offer. It seems likely, I guess, that Mitrovic is going to move on. But at the time of recording, he is still a Fulham player. And for those reasons, it's hard to be particularly negative around them. When you look at the players that they brought in as well, Bassi's an exciting signing who's come in from Ajax. Raul Jimenez, if he can get fit again, could be a good understudy for Micho. I'm sure he'll step up into his place if not. There's just continuity, I guess, is the important thing here. This is a side, we spoke earlier, teams coming up from the Championship at the moment tend to be doing okay with continuity on their side, and that is the case with Fulham. They went up, they kept their key personnel in, they'd had a very good season last season. There are concerns again around the data side of things. Apologies to those who don't care about this, but their underlying numbers last season were much worse than their actual performances. But it still feels to me like there are bigger holes to pick in other teams, and keeping Silva's massive, keeping Mitro's
Quality manager,
yeah, hugely overrated for so long. I'm delighted that
underrated.
Huge underrated.
Yeah, you said overrated.
He was overrated for a week. But he's someone who was ridiculously targeted, as people are saying. He took Hull down when he came in and did an incredible job there. It's often forgotten the job he was doing at Watford when he got the move to Everton. Things really unravelled there before he took the Everton job. And again, at Everton, he was sacked at Everton when they were mid-table, which I think they were actually 8th or 9th. Which when you look back now, doesn't seem too bad. And he's showing now at Fulham the job he can do. Fulham fans just have to hope he doesn't cash in at some point, like others have done, where there's been interest from over the other side of the world in Saudi. So, I'd be very surprised if we're looking at Fulham being one of those teams like a Brentford or a Brighton who could push higher. But for now, with the continuity of personnel, I think we can be pretty sure they should be okay. Although I have seen quite a few people have them a fair bit lower. A really exciting one now in 12th. We've got Bournemouth, and I think if I'd done a 1 to 24 1 to 20, half an hour after the Premier League season had finished, I probably would have had Bournemouth 20th, maybe 19th in the bottom three. What has changed?
Yeah, high on excitement. I'd say low on certainty. I'm going to be honest, I think Bournemouth are the team with the highest range of potential finishes here. Andoni Iraola is basically the reason for the excitement and for the uncertainty. He is a young manager who had a fantastic playing career with Athletic Club, and who, as a manager with Mirandés and then with Rayo Vallecano, has been considered one of Spain's best, if not Spain's best young manager. Is known to be incredible tactician, and his way of getting messages through to his players and for them implementing what he wants them to do on the pitch has been sensational. His teams have always pressed incredibly high and been unbelievably intense and aggressive out of possession. They've generally had amazing home records considering the size of the clubs that he's managed, and they've generally really bloodied the nose of the big boys. They've picked up great results against Barcelona, against Real Madrid, and Iraola and his quality as a manager has basically been pinned on the success of the clubs that he's been at. So of course there's excitement as he comes to Bournemouth, but there has to be some uncertainty as to how, to what extent that certain style of play will translate to the Premier League, how well he can get his messages across in a different country, in a different language for the most part. It's fascinating. I choose to be an Iraola believer. I think that Bournemouth will be much better for his management, and I think that the squad, a lot of the players can come on again from a positive season last season. Players like Solanke and Billing and Tavernier, I think, all had really good seasons. They've made some interesting signings as well. Kerkez is 19, Romain Fevre, Justin Kluivert, both 24, Hamed Junior Traoré 23. So they are quite clearly going for speed, legs, technical ability, and it could be amazing. But there's that thing in the back of your mind. It could be too much too soon. It could be a disaster for a club of Bournemouth's size at this level. We don't know. But I'm choosing to be a believer. I'm going Bournemouth doing pretty well here and being quite exciting to watch. 12th for us.
Yeah, I can't wait to see basically them in action for the first time. I always think when you hear of a new manager you know little about, but you hear the playing style is really aggressive, high pressing. It's always fun to see how it translates into Premier League football, and if you can get that message across early on, excited to see how Bournemouth get on. Just outside the top half is Burnley, who ran away with the Championship last season under Vincent Kompany. I am just really excited to see how Burnley do this coming season. They were the class team by absolutely miles last season. It wasn't a vintage renewal, we have to say, but we've seen plenty of quality teams come up from the Championship in recent seasons. You mentioned Leeds earlier under Bielsa had that brilliant first season. Wilder, Sheffield United had that brilliant first season. Fulham, of course, who came up and did brilliantly last season. Brentford, of course, came up and finished 13th in their first season. So these teams who do come up and can perform well, I think Burnley will be the next in line for those. In Vincent Kompany, they got a manager who I am pretty sure if things go the way that everyone expects them to go, if Kompany continues to improve and it does okay with Burnley, and Pep Guardiola does decide in a couple of years' time that maybe he's had enough of the Premier League, that Kompany will move into his chair. I don't see why not. The football's brilliant. The recruitment since he's been there, I don't think we can credit that necessarily just with him, but he obviously is able to be part of a recruitment team that recruits effectively both domestically and from abroad, and that is something we don't necessarily normally see. You look at last season, how Nathan Teller was such an important player for them on loan from Southampton, how they brought in Taylor Harwood-Bellis from City on loan as well, two really good loanees, homegrown, Ian Matson as well. But then you look to the players they brought in from the continent, whether it's Manuel Benson or Anas Saruri, even Josh Cullen, who came in from Anderlecht, where he played with Kompany. Brilliant players. And they've done the same again this summer with James Trafford, the keeper who everyone can't believe was bought for 18 million after only playing in League One. Well, you're going to believe it pretty soon because he's a very, very good goalkeeper and will be there between the sticks for them. They've got Darragh O'Shea, who's a fantastic centre-back from West Brom, who'll really suit the way that they like to play at 24 too. Exciting signing. They got Jordan Bayer back, who was on loan with them last season from Borussia Mönchengladbach. He's joined on a permanent. And sometimes clubs recruit so well that you just have complete faith in what they're doing. And so I'm just going to assume that Zeki Amdouni is a genius, who's the striker they brought in from Basel in Switzerland. Like, this is, I was concerned when they first came up that maybe Kompany, and we saw it happen against City in the Cup last season, the FA Cup, would just continue to play the way that he wanted to play and not really compensate for the quality of the teams against them. But I think given they've added quality and they'll continue to do so, I think they are going to, I'm sure they'll get beat a bit. I mean, defensively they were good last season, but because they're expansive, they'll get beat a bit. But I'm sure they're going to blitz some teams.
It's interesting that, just very quickly, I genuinely don't see that as a concern. Like, I think that it's right for Burnley, let's say for Bournemouth, if they're going to be quite ambitious with their tactics, I think it's right for them to play that kind of way against the big six clubs. Those aren't the games that matter for Burnley and Bournemouth. They are going to pick up their points, and their league position will be defined by how they do against basically all the teams that we've talked about so far in that kind of 13, 12 team mini league, right? And so for me, having the belief in your system to go up against the big teams and just go and basically be yourself rather than change every other week against a big opponent to try and nick a point. I think that benefits you in those other games because you can be so much surer of yourself and things will be clearly a lot easier. So yeah, it's such an interesting thing when we talk about teams coming up in terms of style of play, but I see Burnley's style of play as being a massive positive rather than something that needs to be concerning or something that needs to be changed just because they're playing at a higher level.
Absolutely. Up to the top half now, and Brentford we've got in 10th. They're 9-4 to finish in the top half.
Wow. Okay. Well, 9th last season, so this is a drop of one place. But I think some of the teams that finished obviously outside of the top half, Chelsea in particular, there's an expectation they will get stronger. So I don't necessarily see this as a negative prediction for Brentford, even though it is a drop from last season. They picked up 59 points with a plus 12 goal difference. Like, these are signs of quality, of a quality Premier League team. I think that's how we should think of Brentford now, even if they've only been in the division for a few seasons, even if historically they've been a smaller club than a lot of the clubs established in this division. Year-on-year improvement has been pretty clear now for upwards of a decade, and I think that's the sort of thing that you can kind of hang your hat on. A lot of the teams we've talked about near the bottom of the league are the sort of teams that we don't think are steady, we don't think have particularly high quality or joined up thinking at the top of the club, and are not necessarily ones that are going to keep an even keel if things start going wrong at the start of the season. Brentford are going to be without Ivan Toney, their best attacking player, for a number of months. That's obviously a big red flag, and I do think it'll have an effect on them, but I also think we can just believe in them having a pretty strong plan. I don't imagine that they're just going to wander into this season and go like, oh no, we haven't got Toney. What the hell? What are we going to do? So even if it doesn't look like they've signed an obvious replacement, I think either they probably have one lined up that they'll get done, or they will have a way of playing that will get the best out of the players that they have at their disposal. So, they were 7th for non-penalty goal expected goals ratio last season in the Premier League. Again, a sign of a team that, on balance of play, on average, were stronger than their opponent, and that's what we're looking for here. A team with a plan, a team with year-on-year improvement. Brentford finishing in the top half at what seemed to me like a pretty juicy price.
Yeah, 9-4, as I say, Brentford to finish in the top half. Next, we've got Aston Villa, who I know there's a lot of pre-season optimism amongst their fans, amongst neutrals as well. We've got them in 9th, and I don't think that's necessarily a negative prediction, even though I'm sure it will be seen by that by some Villa fans. Unai Emery came in last season and clearly did an incredible job to take them from the fringes of relegation up into the European places. That's part of it. They're going to have a European campaign this season. With some teams, you'd wonder maybe they'll rotate with Unai Emery. We know that he's going to prioritise those cup competitions. And that's the other thing. Emery is clearly a very, very capable manager and a very good manager and somebody who will take Villa upwards in their kind of trajectory. However, his record generally in his career with clubs of similar size to Villa is massive achievement in cup competitions, not particularly high achieving within domestic leagues. And I kind of think this will happen again there.
I can't wait to see what price they are for the Conference League.
Yeah,
short. What do you do as a bookmaker here?
Yeah.
You've got Unai Emery, the greatest winner not in minor European competition of all time. A team in Villa who come from the division
I've got a price
where the winners came from last year in West Ham, who were probably not as strong a team as Villa overall. I mean, how do you even approach that?
So I can tell you that only one firm are out with prices. Star Sports came out on the 24th of, on the oddschecker grids, 24th of July at 11-2, 5-1, 4-1, 7-2, 130. So we've missed out. 130 price is the price now. But yeah, I mean, they brought in Pau Torres, who clearly is a ball-playing centre-back. It is incredibly impressive, and it's a sign of how far Villa have come. They can go out and sign a guy who, he played in the World Cup for Spain just a few months ago. I also know that fans are very excited to see Moussa Diaby, who is kind of the next in line of this conveyor belt of exciting wide players that Villa signed from Europe. You know, it was Leon Bailey last summer. Diaby does feel like another step up and somebody who really should be able to impact games in the Premier League. Yuri Tielemans is another one where if he can regain his form from previously, then he should be fine. They've got a big squad, so they should be able to rotate. Ollie Watkins is a striker. I think we'll have a massive season. You know, it's hard to pick holes in them, but I do think with the cup competitions they're going to have and the fact that there are a few teams that we're going to talk about shortly who either there's reason to believe they will improve or are so rock solid. I personally don't see Villa finishing kind of upwards of 9th at this stage, but that's not to say they won't have a great season. It's not to say that I don't rate Emery as well. In 8th...
Any more caveats?
I just don't want to upset anyone, is my thing. So no, I don't. I have to do Edge of the Box with Dan Bardell every week, so I don't want him to get upset. In 8th, Ange Postecoglou's Spurs.
I'm finding this pretty difficult. There are some things that I'm broadly positive about.
Quickly, on the way here, it seemed like there's a chance that Kane may go. Since we've been sitting here, the talk is now that Kane is kind of leaning towards staying. Right?
It's a live situation with Harry Kane, and quite frankly, I'll be honest, the difference in predicting Tottenham with Harry Kane, if you knew he was going to be there for the whole season, versus if you knew he wasn't going to be there at all, is massive. I mean, possibly one of the players that has the most obvious value to the club that they're currently at, and whose departure or presence has the biggest impact, you know, the sort of MVP type stuff. Like genuinely, with Kane, with Postecoglou, who I broadly think will be a positive manager for Tottenham in the long term, could have a similar impact to Maurizio Pochettino when he came into Tottenham a few years ago. I do believe in Postecoglou, while also worrying that in the short term there could be some real teething issues. If we are to believe what we've heard about him in terms of tactics, in terms of how he's going to go about rebuilding this football team, well, with the squad that he has available, I don't see an obvious sort of connection there, particularly in terms of the defenders that they have and some of the deep midfielders. If there's going to be a big onus on build up right in their own defensive third in order to release an attack quicker, having sucked teams onto them, I think there could be some real issues playing out from the back. And I'm a bit worried that the fans might struggle to buy into what Postecoglou is going to want to do. So real uncertainty for me. I mean, they were 8th last year. We're predicting 8th here again. They don't have any European football, which is a positive for them. Gives Postecoglou a bit more time on the training pitch than some of his peers at the level. But right now, just very, very difficult to know with or without Kane exactly what we can expect from Spurs, because Son dropped off massively last season, and we hope he gets back to his previous level, but I don't know if we can truly believe it. Richarlison and Kulusevski are good players. I feel like they could be a part of a good team, but are they the ones to raise the ceiling of a team? Again, I'm not 100% sure. So a lot of uncertainty, and hopefully the teams we have above them will show why. We've got them staying in 8th.
Who have we got above them?
We've got Brighton above them, who are an incredible football club in so many ways. You know, copy and paste a lot of the things I said about Brentford in terms of year-on-year improvement, in terms of some of the highest quality decision makers that a football club in the world has, with a group of people from top to bottom that seem to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of everyone else, and not that many clubs seem to have that. So I can't remember exactly where they finished last season, but I know they made the Europa League, so probably 6th. This is probably a drop of a place, or maybe staying in the same zone. Roberto De Zerbi came in after Potter left, and their improvement was incredible. After New Year, they had the 3rd best non-penalty XG ratio in the whole division. Again, just a measure of sort of average dominance over their opponent. They were one of the best teams in the division from that point, which speaks to the quality that De Zerbi has. He didn't have a pre-season last year, so with a tactician and a coach like that, we can probably expect him to be implementing even more good ideas this summer. He did have the World Cup break, and straight after that, they looked a different team. So I don't worry with them too much about losing players. If it's Caicedo, if it's Mitoma, I sort of see them a bit like an animal where you chop one head off and they grow 2 more. Like we've seen it time and time again over the last few years. João Pedro, probably the breakout star of the Premier League, would be my prediction. I think he's going to be absolutely sensational.
Yes.
And I can't wait to see him play for a team that has a really good plan for him. So very positive about Brighton, even with the added difficulty of European football for the first time, I think, in their history. We still think they'll go well.
In 6th, we've got Newcastle, and this is, in my mind, probably the hardest team to predict in this kind of top group, where there's no reason in my mind why Newcastle can't challenge for the title. In that you look at what they did last season and the improvement year on year, when you also consider that they had basically the best XG ratio in the whole division from kind of middle of September onwards, it wasn't a fluke. Like the level of dominance of them in games against the opposition was enough to warrant their position in the league. And when you consider the players they brought in, I know that Tonali is a player that there were some eyebrows raised about his transfer fee, but he certainly elevates what was already a brilliant midfield with Bruno Guimaraes in there. Harvey Barnes is a player who's incredibly direct and will add something in the final third. Isak is a player that I love, who was injured for a big chunk of last season. I think him having a full pre-season and being fit to lead the line will improve them too. So Newcastle fans are like, well, you're saying all these nice stuff about us. Why have you got us in 6th? And a big reason for that is that I'm a big believer, and this will come on to why we've got Chelsea in 5th. I'm a massive believer that when a team doesn't have European football, it's just a huge advantage, like a massive advantage. We saw Chelsea fall out of Europe. Antonio Conte came in and took them to the Premier League. We saw, the big moment in my mind, the thing that really changed Arteta's time at Arsenal was, again, that season without European football, where Arsenal looked like they were going to get into the Champions League, fell away late on, but kind of the whole place changed and people started believing in Arteta again and the whole project. So Newcastle not only going from last season having that benefit to this season suddenly having Champions League football, so it's not even Europa League where you play on Thursdays, it's proper, has to be your first team, it's going to be Tuesday, Wednesday. I think it's going to be difficult for them to deal with that, and I'm not convinced at this stage they've got the strength and depth needed to rotate as heavily as they'd need to. So, this might end up looking stupid. They might be able to deal with it easily and spend a lot more money between now and the end of August. But I think if we're going to be on, and the teams around Newcastle, I think have also improved. Where last season, given what happened at Spurs, at Chelsea, at Liverpool, it was ripe for teams like Newcastle, Brighton, Villa to push themselves into those positions. I don't know if we'll see that again. So Newcastle are in 6th, and in Chelsea in 5th. That European football line is a big reason why I think that they finished on 44 points last season. It was a horrendous performance by all accounts. And I know that some people look at Todd Bowley and think, well, Chelsea won't be good whilst Todd Bowley is there based on last season. I completely disagree. I think the transfer strategy is clearly risky in the short term, but it feels to me like they're basically building a squad full of wonder kids where even the success rate doesn't have to be that high for it to be an incredibly exciting future for Chelsea.
It feels like there are qualified people making the transfer decisions,
correct,
which wasn't the case necessarily last season.
100%. And it's important to note not all of these guys are going to be thrown straight into the first team. Yes, you want experience running through the side. Enzo Fernandez being the senior central midfielder at 23 raises eyebrows, but he's also a player who's won the World Cup 6 months ago and has been given a fair bit of responsibility in that Argentina team.
He's got good eyebrows as well,
and he's just
very well kept.
I love watching him play football so much. But it's they do need, I guess, some balance in that squad. The Nkunku news that he had surgery this week is obviously devastating for Chelsea fans. I think he was one of the... I didn't really understand why people weren't getting more excited about his signing, like an elite European talent who's proven on the highest stage coming to Chelsea. But he will be out for the foreseeable future. I think it's 4 months or so. And in Nicholas Jackson, they've got a player who looks dynamite in pre-season, but I always think with pre-season, let's actually see it happen in the Premier League before we make any big judgments. But Poch is a big thing, where the Tuchel, Potter, Lampard succession plan was just no plan at all. It didn't work. They've now got a manager in place who I think is a magnificent manager and is kind of perfectly suited to take a group of young players and nurture them and coax them into a very good football team. We saw him do it at Spurs to incredible effect. You think that he took that Spurs team to the Champions League final, an unbelievable effort. And people say he'd never won anything with Spurs. Well, I think his achievements at Spurs trump a lot of the kind of victories and trophies we have seen won. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they started pretty slow, but I think as we get further onto the season, as Poch can really develop this team, and as the other teams around them are having to play in Europe week in, week out, I think we'll see Chelsea continue to progress. And yeah, I think fifth is optimistic, but I also could see them improving on that depending on how these players do settle. Top four now. Who have you got who have we got, I should say, in fourth?
Yeah, we've got Liverpool and Manchester United in third and fourth, respectively. I think the Liverpool versus Man United match bet is a fascinating one, to be honest with you. We've got
Liverpool just favourite.
We've got Liverpool just above Manchester United, and you're going to tell me why in a second. I mean, I haven't got anything particularly negative to say about Manchester United. I love the transfer business. I think overall, I see a club, and I'm touching wood as I say this because it would be great to see Manchester United, back towards the very top table of English football. I think I see a club that's on its way there now in terms of the trajectory after what's been, such uncertainty and chaos at times behind the scenes. I think Ten Hag has been a really, really good appointment on that front, just as the kind of leader of the football side. I think he has very clear ideas of how to go about things, and I really believe that the second year of Ten Hag 2.0 for United, will be stronger than Ten Hag year one. I think that Onana coming in for De Gea was just a move that had to happen. Changing the glovesman for United is something that's been massively needed, and I can't wait to see Onana in the Premier League because the stuff that he does on the ball is just fascinating, to be honest, and absolutely wild, and I think will be a massive, massive positive for them. De Gea with his feet, simply not confident or technically good enough. Then Mason Mount is a player that, again, like, you get these narratives about players that come quite often, change every month. And for Mount, the narrative became at Chelsea that he wasn't quite good enough. I just couldn't disagree more. Chelsea were a basket case of a club for the last 2 years of Mount's time there. But previously, he'd won Player of the Season 2 years in a row, won the Champions League with Chelsea as one of their key players, winning the elite competition in European football. A player that every manager he's ever played under absolutely adores for what he does out of possession, and seems to respect him a lot more than the average fan in terms of what he can do with the ball as well. I think it's going to be an amazing signing. Not 100% sure exactly where he will make his role on the pitch, but I think his versatility is something that managers rather love so much. And then Højlund up top. I mean, clearly this is a massive outlay on a player that doesn't have a ton of minutes or a ton of senior goals behind him because he's so young. But do I trust in Manchester United's scouting at this point? Maybe more so than before. I don't think he needs to be Haaland, and I don't think it would be fair to judge him as being necessary to compete with Haaland in terms of goal output. For me, just the very fact of having a striker, someone that you can really put a lot of development time into, someone that you can fix at the top of the pitch, allows Rashford to play off the left where he thrives, allows not Wout Weghorst to be playing minutes up top for you. I think that just has to be a positive for them as well. So, yeah, I'm positive about United, but we haven't got them any higher than fourth.
No.
Why is that?
Liverpool. I mean, United are 4 to 5 to finish in the top four, which seems a big price to me. That's with Coral and Labrooks. I should also say that in the top 6 market, both Newcastle and Chelsea are 8 to 15. So our positivity around Chelsea is reflected, but in the betting odds too. Liverpool. I mean, just chaos.
They're going to win 5-4 every game.
It's exciting. Last season was obviously very poor, and we've seen this happen before with Liverpool, where they'll follow up a poor season with a very strong season, and that could be the case here. Like this, it feels again as high variance because there was talk last season that Was Jurgen Klopp's time at the club coming to an end? I do wonder if things don't start particularly well at Liverpool. Could that be the case? Could he possibly, his cycle be coming to a close? But with the attacking talent they've added, in terms of Szoboszlai, one of the most exciting young players in European football, just 22 years of age, but has shown at RB Leipzig that he can score ridiculous goals. One of those players who has a ball striking ability that most can only dream of. Alexis McAllister, who it's incredible to think he's only 24, given what he's achieved already. Has been a magnificent player at Brighton over a couple of seasons. Can play a range of positions. Like, there aren't many players who can be as effective, almost as a 6, an 8, and a 10. But in McAllister, they've got someone who will help the possession-based style that Klopp likes to play, as well as being a very effective presser. Like, they've lost a lot of experience. It's amazing that Fabinho went from basically being the most important player in their side to an extent in terms of being the glue that held it all together to them being dispensable, and he's moved on to the Saudi Pro League. Jordan Henderson moves on as well, Roberto Firmino, James Milner, and these were players who were still contributing in a positive sense, I think, to what Liverpool were doing. And that has to be a concern of sorts, but they do have just an incredible crop of young players. Like Curtis Jones, I know he's someone that you like a lot, having watched him in the under-21 Euros, but he is a player that I don't think necessarily the average fan has really appreciated how good he is yet, both in terms of his ball-playing ability, his ability to play out of tight spaces in possession. Again, he's an absolute workaholic off the ball too. Harvey Elliott, I think, should have a great season. Disappointed to see Fabio Carvalho be sent out on a loan, but maybe that's going to be the best thing for his development at Leipzig. And then you think of the front line, where it's easy to forget about Luis Diaz after his injury last season, but he should be a massive player. Gakpo came in January. I think Darwin Núñez could do what he did previously and have an unbelievable season for goal scoring. He gets into those areas so consistently, and we haven't even mentioned Mo Salah yet. So they're still stacked. They've still got an incredible squad, a couple of really fresh additions, and if they do add Romeo Lavia, they will have that player in the holding role who should be able to fill in for Fabinho for the foreseeable future.
I feel like a stronger Liverpool, an improving Manchester United, and you're predicting something of a redemption for Chelsea after last year's debacle. I mean, that's going to lead to a really exciting top of the division if we are correct with those predictions. But we've still got the same
boring,
top two, don't we?
We're like, should we just put Luton second, just for the views? We do have the same top two. Interestingly, Arsenal are, so in terms of top two odds, United and Liverpool both 9-4. Arsenal best price 2-1 still to finish in the top two at Bet365.
Okay.
Now, this time last year, it was almost unthinkable to predict that Arsenal would finish in the top two. Then, in kind of February, it was almost unthinkable to say that Arsenal wouldn't win the league. They finished second. Why do we think they're going to do it again?
Well, I think part of this has to be to talk about the team that we have winning the title, Manchester City. We'll go into a bit more depth in them. But I basically think City, by the end of last season, had almost completed the game in the way that they had developed, particularly adding a physical dominance that they'd never really had before and an absolute intensity and quality out of possession that I don't think they'd ever quite achieved before. On top of everything else, they are an incredibly complete team, and I think the only real question mark about them at the moment has to be more questions of motivation and, do they need to turn over the squad a bit more in order to have hungrier players? Might they start slowly? And these are the sorts of questions that you ask about a team when you don't have many other holes to pick in them, quite frankly. When it comes to Arsenal, again, very positive about the work that they've done this summer. I think a lot of clubs seemingly much smarter with their recruitment now, and it's hard not to be excited about the players that Arsenal have added and the extra dimensions that those players will give them. I guess if there was a knock on Arsenal at the end of last season, it was that probably by March, an incredibly effective way of playing and way of attacking in particular had probably reached something close to its sell-by date in terms of what clubs, how much they'd worked out ways to counteract how Arsenal attacked. They can do a bit more this season, particularly with the attacking options that they have and the different sorts of players that they have. Havertz in particular, a bit of a wild card because he is a quality operator and can operate in so many different roles. Declan Rice is the addition in midfield. Again,
not a bad player.
We're not 100% sure what Arteta's plans are for him, but he's a player with such incredible skill set that you can make a case for him dominating games in pretty much any midfield role. So a lot of excitement. I guess one of the drawbacks, George, would be the addition of Champions League football, as you've discussed. European football for you is kind of a big thing to bear in mind when you're doing 1-20s. Now, I did say to you, hold on, they were in Europe last year. You made a fair point. They were in the Europa League last year, and they basically had a B team for the
Europa League team.
Not going to do that this year on Tuesdays and Wednesdays,
I saw that team beat Oxford 3-0 at the Kassam Stadium last season. Yeah, they can't do that. They can't rotate between two sides again. It's going to be interesting to see that they're going to have two number ones, with David Raya seemingly moving to Arsenal. If that's the case, and that's at least one spot they can rotate pretty effectively. But and you've got certain players like Fabio Vieira, of course, who's a year older, who's settled into life at Arsenal a bit more. Like, could he be the kind of player? I mean, I don't think so. No, this is what I'm saying.
I didn't expect Fabio Vieira to be brought up in this discussion.
But this is my point: is you look at the succession planning of teams who you'd anticipate, like, can players from that Europa League side make the transition into kind of first team rotation? My point is that the likes of Vieira probably not. So yeah, I also generally find it difficult to take kind of one season that is such a massive outlier from what's happened before and think it's going to be replicated again. But in Bukayo Saka, I still think there is a player who, at 21 years old, has already proven himself to be not just one of the most exciting young players in the Premier League, but just one of the most exciting players in the Premier League, one of the best players in the Premier League. He's got 11 goals and 14 goals in his last two seasons, and I just don't really see why it stops there, given the role that he's going to play, given that Arsenal do not have that out-and-out number 9 who the whole team is geared around scoring goals. We saw Saka get a hat-trick for England earlier this summer. I just think when you look at the numbers that someone like Mo Salah posts from that same role...
Are you saying Saka's going to become Salah in terms of goal output?
I think possibly. Well, it just wouldn't surprise me if we suddenly see a big leap in his output and we see him posting 20 plus. I think it's going to happen at some... I don't see why it wouldn't happen at some stage. He's too good, and there's no denying that he gets into goal scoring positions regularly, and he's a very good finisher, and he takes pens sometimes, which helps as well. So I think Arsenal will build on last season, but again, it's going to be very competitive to do so, and I'm intrigued to see how they approach their Champions League.
What do you think about City then? We've got them winning the league. So I've mentioned that I think that the sort of obvious knocks on them, as if you could have many knocks on a team that's just won basically everything there was to win, apart from last weekend's Community Shield, of course. The stuff like, will they be motivated to go again, or will they have lost a little bit of their hunger? That sort of stuff. Where do you stand on discussions like that pre-season?
So they are City are 5 to 6 best price to win the league right now, and I wouldn't be backing them at 5 to 6.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact that in my mind there's just absolutely no question that they are the most likely winners. So therefore, when you're doing this, you have to put them first. Last season, again, it's easy to forget that last season they were second best for a long part of the campaign where Arsenal with a better side, and they weren't really convincing. There was talk of crises. We saw Pep changing people's roles and systems and teams week by week. He then obviously found the winning system, and they were unbelievably good for the last few months of the season. John Stones has moved into central midfield, has given them a bit more control in games, and his weird ball carrying ability that no one knew he had has been a massive success story. But again, that was a small, very small sample size of games, and just to assume that's going to continue, I'm not necessarily sure. But the fact remains, they've lost Gundogan, they've lost Mahrez, they brought in Kovacic, who I think is going to be a completely different player at Manchester City under Pep Guardiola. He's a player that I adore, his ball carrying ability plus his kind of short range passing, and is again a player who is so good in tight spaces. I think he'll be a brilliant addition to City's team. Vardiol is obviously wasn't aware they need another left-footed centre back, but they've gone and got another better one. When you look at what Akanji and Ake have done, he's clearly a big upgrade. I think in time he'll be a huge player for them. But it's Pep Guardiola. He is someone who, with Arsenal and Arteta, Arteta has done an incredible job to take Arsenal from where they were to where they are now. But it's too early to make comparisons of his innate genius than it is to Guardiola, who is just a serial winner of the last 2 decades wherever he goes. Yes, with incredible squads, but the way that he gets the teams to gel and play has been so impressive. But I do think there has to be an argument here that now that they've won the Champions League, they've won the treble, they've basically done it all. Is this the moment where this era of, if you think that football is cyclical, is this era of dominance going to start coming to an end now? Is the motivation still going to be there? Can they keep up that intensity just to go and just win another Premier League yet again? We're going to see. I personally think at 5 to 6 is too short, but as I say, I think I'd be being disingenuous if we put anyone else first. So there you have it. That is our 20 to 1 or 1 to 20 in the Premier League this season. I'll run through it quickly now. We've got City winning the league, Arsenal in second, Liverpool third, Manchester United in fourth, Chelsea fifth, Newcastle sixth, Brighton seventh, Tottenham eighth, Aston Villa ninth, Brentford 10th, Burnley 11th, Bournemouth 12th, Fulham 13th, Nottingham Forest 14th, Crystal Palace 15th, West Ham 16th, Luton 17th, Everton, Wolves, Sheffield United, the bottom three. Let us know what you think in the comments if you like, but even better, just enter the Million Pound Predictor that has been launched by oddschecker this season in time for the new Premier League campaign. It's free to enter. You get one entry per person. They close on the 15th of September at 4 o'clock. Loads of time to get your entries in. 18 plus, UK only, full T's and C's do apply. Make sure you enter that. £1 million. £1 million. You could buy like a really good League One centre back.
I'm a bit upset that we've submitted a joint one because it's 500 grand each.
Do you want to know what's good?
Go on.
We haven't submitted it. So you can do your one, I'll do my one.
Still got a few weeks to do that.
One per person, not one per two people. So yeah, that is our team now. Hopefully you've enjoyed the preview. Make sure you subscribe to the oddschecker. Make sure you subscribe to the oddschecker YouTube channel where you can find loads more oddschecker betting shows across different sports. But that was our Premier League preview. Please do ensure that you are gambling responsibly. Make sure you download the oddschecker app for all of these prices and plenty of markets ahead of the campaign starting. Enjoy the start to the season.